Ellie Warren woke to the sound of thunder cracking like a bone being snapped in two. Her breath came shallow and fast, her nightgown clinging to her skin with sweat. Outside her window, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the dark silhouette of the lake below. Rain battered the panes, each drop a tiny drumbeat echoing the rhythm of her racing heart. She sat up slowly, hands trembling, trying to steady herself. The dream had returned, that same dream that had haunted her since childhood. A stormy sky, a lake that shimmered, not with moonlight, but with countless eyes staring back at her, always watching, always waiting. It had started again. Eldon Hollow hadn't changed much in decades. Tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains, it was the kind of place where secrets grew like ivy, and truth was buried deeper than the coal mines that once gave the town its name. Ellie had returned to teach at the small schoolhouse, thinking maybe, just maybe, the past would stay buried. But the dream refused to loosen its grip. She pulled on a sweater and stepped outside. The air was thick, heavy with ozone, the kind that hinted the storm wasn't finished yet. In the distance, the lake glimmered under the bruised sky, reflecting the lightning like a restless mirror. She didn't know why her feet carried her down the muddy path, only that they did. Halfway to the shore, she stopped. A massive tree had fallen, its roots jutting out like gnarled fingers toward the sky. The trunk lay split open, charred black from a lightning strike. The smell of scorched wood hung in the air, but it wasn't the tree that held her attention. It was what lay beside it. Bones. White, clean, and unmistakably human. Half buried in the mud, a skeleton grinned up at her as if it had been waiting to be found. Her breath caught. Her vision swam. Footsteps echoed behind her. She spun around to see Jonas Delaney approaching, umbrella in hand. Tall, lean, and older than she remembered, he hadn't lost the intensity in his eyes. It had been years since they'd spoken. "Didn't expect to find you out here," he said, voice steady, eyes flicking to the bones. "I couldn't sleep." He crouched beside the remains, brushing away dirt. "This storm's uncovering more than just trees, it seems." They both stood in silence for a moment, staring down at the forgotten bones. "You think it's from before?" Ellie asked. "Could be. Folks been disappearing out here for decades. My father wrote about it before he stopped, the sentence unfinished." Ellie didn't press. Some ghosts weren't ready to speak. "We should call the sheriff," he added. She nodded slowly, but her mind was elsewhere. The dream, the eyes, the lake, all of it pressing against her ribs like a weight too heavy to carry. That night, she sat by her fireplace, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Rain tapped the roof like fingers against a coffin. On the mantel, an old photo of her grandmother Miriam stared back at her. In the faded image, young Miriam stood beside the same lake, the same mountains behind her, and in her eyes, something was reflected, something that looked too much like what Ellie had seen in her dreams. The storm raged on, thunder rolling like the growl of a distant beast. She whispered to no one, "What did you see, Grandma?" Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, the shadows in the room seemed to move. If stories like these give you chills and make you question what hides beneath calm surfaces, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've only just begun, and what waits beneath Eldon Hollow runs deeper than any of us can imagine. The next morning arrived shrouded in a quiet unease. The rain had eased, but the sky remained heavy, the clouds low and unmoving, as if reluctant to reveal what they had watched through the night. Ellie stood at the edge of the schoolhouse yard, staring at the horizon where the lake met the trees. The children played behind her, their laughter muted against the weight in her chest. Every time she blinked, she saw the bones again, white, glistening, grinning. By midday, the news had spread. In Eldon Hollow, whispers traveled faster than any train. The bones by the lake had become the only topic in town, each retelling more elaborate than the last. "They say it was a murder," one woman whispered to another at the general store. "Could be one of the Delaney boys from 38, someone else chimed in. "No," said a third. "I heard it's one of the drowned." Ellie heard it all. Each version carried a different flavor of fear, but none offered truth. After class, she visited her grandmother at the care home. Miriam Warren sat in her usual chair by the window, eyes distant, hands folded neatly in her lap. Time had taken much from her sharp mind, her fierce voice, but sometimes when the storm came or a certain tune played on the radio, fragments of the old Miriam returned. Ellie sat beside her, gently placing a hand over hers. "Gran, I need to ask you something. About the lake." Miriam didn't react at first. But then, slowly, she turned her head, eyes narrowing just slightly, as if part of her recognized the question. "They're watching again," she said softly. Ellie's heart skipped. "Who's watching?" Miriam's gaze shifted to the window. "We buried them deep, but the water remembers." Ellie leaned in. "What did you see back then?" Miriam blinked, her focus fading. "Their eyes were wrong," she whispered. "Too many, too bright." Ellie swallowed hard. "Do you mean people?" But her grandmother had already drifted back into silence, lips moving without sound. Outside, the wind picked up. A curtain fluttered. Ellie stood unsettled. Miriam had rarely spoken since the stroke last year, and never with such clarity. It felt like something, or someone, had stirred her memory awake. She left the care home and walked to the town archives, a dusty corner of the old library where Jonas often worked late into the night. Sure enough, she found him hunched over a stack of yellowing papers, a cigarette smoldering in the ashtray beside him. He looked up. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" She shook her head. "You said your father wrote about disappearances. Show me." Jonas exhaled, then pulled a folder from beneath a stack. He kept clippings, notes. People thought he was losing it, but he was onto something. Ellie opened the folder and found headlines dating back to the early 1900s. "Boy vanishes near lake's edge. No tracks found." "Storm claims another. Woman missing since Thursday." "3 go walking, only 1 returns. Eldon Hollow police baffled." But one photo stopped her cold. It was an old group portrait, town picnic, dated 1901. Dozens of people smiling stiffly posed in front of the lake. And there, in the reflection on the water, were eyes. Not just reflections of the townsfolk, but glowing, inhuman eyes, too many, too symmetrical. She touched the edge of the photo, breath trembling. "This can't be real." Jonas leaned closer. "I didn't believe it either. But you saw the bones. You've had the dreams." She looked at him. "What if they're connected?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A sudden gust outside rattled the windows. Papers fluttered. Something distant howled through the trees. Ellie whispered, "What is this place hiding?" Neither of them had an answer. Not yet. Rain returned before morning, soft at first, then drumming with insistence by dawn. Ellie stood on the back porch of her childhood home, mug in hand, eyes locked on the mist rising from the lake. Her thoughts lingered on the photograph. Those glowing, unnatural eyes mirrored in still water. The image clung to her mind like a burr, scratching at the edges of her reason. She hadn't slept. Instead, she'd pulled her grandfather's old trunk from the attic, determined to unearth whatever threads remained of her family's history with that place. The trunk creaked open reluctantly, spilling its contents. Brittle letters, faded maps, notebooks smudged with coal dust and oil. She dug until she found a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled in a tight, slanted script. Her grandfather's. He died before she was born, a name barely spoken in the Warren house. Her mother always said he was too curious for a minor. Now Ellie understood. The entries began as mundane notations about weather, crop yields, town gossip, but midway through the book, the tone shifted. September 14th, 1901. "The lake boiled tonight. I swear it. No wind, no rain, just steam rising up as if the water hated the moon. October 3rd. I saw them again. Reflections in the lake when none stood on the shore, eyes that blinked where no face should be. October 17th. We buried the last of the bodies this morning. Said it was a fever. It wasn't." Ellie's fingers tightened on the fragile pages. The further she read, the more frantic the handwriting became, ending abruptly with a single line scrawled across the bottom of the last page. "If they wake again, don't listen. Just run." She closed the journal slowly, her chest hollow. She didn't want to believe it, yet every step she took brought her closer to something undeniable, something deep, ancient, and not quite human. That afternoon she met Jonas at the lake's edge. The water was still, too still. No breeze stirred its surface, which gleamed like polished glass beneath a grey sky. "You okay?" he asked, noticing the journal in her hand. "No," she said, "but I found something." They sat on a damp log while Ellie read aloud select passages. Jonas didn't interrupt. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "My dad used to say this lake was older than the town, older than the mountains, that it remembers everything." Ellie turned to him. "Do you believe him?" "I'm starting to." She stared out across the water. The lake seemed to breathe, its ripples slow and measured. And then, something moved beneath the surface. Just a flicker, a shimmer, like light catching on glass. But it was enough. Jonas stood. "Did you see that?" "I did." They moved closer. The reflection of the clouds broke, replaced by a shape, indistinct, shadowed, yet lined with pinpricks of white, like stars or eyes, Ellie whispered. "Just like the photo." Jonas pulled her back. "We shouldn't be here." She resisted. "But we are." "And it knows." Behind them the trees rustled. A deer emerged from the brush, tall, slender, and oddly still. Its coat was sleek, untouched by mud or rain. And its eyes were white, not blind but glowing softly, like low-burning coals. It stared at them, unblinking. Ellie took a step forward. "Ellie," Jonas warned. But the deer turned and vanished between the trees as silently as it had come. Ellie exhaled. "We're being watched," Jonas nodded. "And not just by animals." They walked back in silence, the journal held tightly under her arm, the weight of her grandfather's words sinking deeper with every step. That night she dreamed again, but this time she wasn't on the shore. She was in the water, eyes open, surrounded by shadows that pulsed with light. And all around her a voice she didn't know but somehow recognized, whispered from the depths, "You came back." Sunday came cloaked in clouds and a restless wind. The church bell rang out over Eldon Hollow, its echo cutting through the morning hush like a blade. Ellie hadn't been inside since she was a child, but that day she found herself walking up the gravel path toward the white-clapboard building with uncertain steps. Inside, the pews creaked with the shifting weight of townsfolk, clutching hymnals and whispering beneath their breath. The sermon hadn't started, but the air already felt thick, charged with something unspoken. She slid into a back pew, eyes scanning the altar where Father Isaiah Rook stood with his head bowed. He had led this church since before Ellie was born. Tall, gaunt, with a voice like gravel and fire. The town respected him, feared him even. His word carried weight, especially among those too afraid to name their doubts aloud. When he raised his head, silence fell like snowfall. "This storm," he began, voice low and resonant, "has shaken more than trees. It has shaken the veil." Ellie stiffened. Others leaned in. "There are things in this hollow," Rook continued, "older than our names, older than even sin. Things that watch, that remember. And some among us," his gaze swept the congregation, "have chosen to stir what should remain sleeping." A few heads turned. Ellie felt every eye that lingered on her back. "The Lord warns against curiosity," Rook said, louder now. "The serpent tempted Eve not with evil but with knowledge, and so we fell." She rose quietly and slipped out before the sermon ended. Her hands trembled, and not from the cold. Later that afternoon, as the sun briefly pierced the clouds, Rook came to her door. She hesitated, but opened it. "Miss Warren," he said, tipping his hat. "May I?" She nodded, stepping aside. He entered with careful steps, gaze moving across the room like he expected something hidden in every shadow. "I heard you've been near the lake," he said. "I have," Ellie replied, arms crossed. "I also heard you found something." His voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "I found bones, and a truth that nobody in this town wants to talk about." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, something more dangerous. Certainty. "You don't know what you're inviting," he said quietly. "You think they're secrets waiting to be uncovered, but they're locks, and you're breaking them." "What are they then?" she asked. "The eyes, the dreams. What do they want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and handed her a thin, brittle pamphlet. It was handwritten, ink faded and smudged, titled simply, "On the Guardians Below." This was written in 1861, he said, by the first preacher in Eldon Hollow. He called them watchers, spirits, not of God, but not of the devil either. Something else. They slept beneath the lake and kept balance, but only if undisturbed. Ellie stared at the yellowed pages. "And if they're disturbed? Then the water remembers," he said, "and the sky opens." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You carry the blood of those who called them first. That makes you marked." Ellie's mouth went dry. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," he said. "And a prayer." That night, unable to sleep, she took a lantern and crept back to the church. The lock on the archive room broke easily with a firm twist of the crowbar. Dust bloomed in the air as she pulled open drawer after drawer. She found what she didn't know she was looking for. Sketches of the lake with concentric circles labeled in Latin, journal entries describing chants during eclipses, and symbols, crude eyes drawn over and over again in desperate repetition. One entry read, "We begged them not to return, but one girl stood on the shore and called their names." Ellie closed the drawer with shaking hands. The wind howled outside, and somewhere far off a low sound like a bell rung underwater echoed through her bones. The following morning brought with it a stranger. Dr. Clara Mills stepped off the rusted Greyhound bus, wearing a grey coat too fine for Eldon Hollow, and eyes that had clearly seen stranger places. She was here for the magnetic readings, anomalies she'd tracked for over a year, converging inexplicably on this forgotten patch of Appalachia. The townsfolk eyed her with suspicion, as they did all outsiders. Clara didn't mind. She was used to that. Her instruments were more honest than people anyway. She set up shop in the unused ranger's station near the lake, unpacking her oscilloscopes and compasses with the kind of reverence others reserved for relics. Almost immediately, she noticed the pull. Every needle she placed near the shoreline trembled, then spun, not northward but in slow circles as if drawn by something beneath the surface. By noon, word of her arrival had reached Ellie. Jonas met her at the schoolhouse. "She's setting up equipment near the lake," he said, brushing damp leaves from his coat. "Some kind of scientist." Ellie blinked. Did she say why? "Magnetic anomalies. Said this place lights up on maps like a signal flare." They exchanged a glance. The lake again. Later that day, Ellie found Clara adjusting a strange device shaped like a spider with glass legs. The woman didn't look up as Ellie approached. "You're Miss Warren," Clara said without introduction. "I've read your grandfather's mining reports. Fascinating." Ellie frowned. "You're here for the lake. I'm here for the pulse beneath it." The answer chilled her. Clara straightened, finally facing her. "This ground is humming. Faint, but real. And it's not from tectonic activity or magnetic ore. There's a rhythm, Miss Warren, almost like breathing." Ellie hesitated. "Do you believe in watchers?" Clara didn't laugh, but her eyes sparkled. "I believe in things that leave traces, and this place is full of them." Together they walked along the lake's edge. The water lapped quietly, but the air around them seemed thicker, heavier. Clara paused near a patch of reeds. "My instruments spike here every 6 seconds, like clockwork. It's coming from down there." Ellie crouched and dipped her hand into the water. It was warmer than it should have been for mid-autumn. Not unpleasant, but wrong. As they turned to leave, Ellie spotted something in the mud, a smooth stone half buried. She knelt and brushed it clean. It was flat, palm-sized and carved with a symbol, a perfect eye with concentric rings around it. The carving was ancient, the grooves worn but precise. Clara leaned in. "That's not local. Looks pre-Columbian, maybe older." Ellie stared at the eye, unease coiling in her gut. "I've seen this before. In the church archive. Over and over." They took the stone back to Clara's makeshift lab. As she ran tests, Ellie paged through the old pamphlet Father Rook had given her. Halfway through, she found the same symbol, accompanied by a passage. "The eye that sees in sleep shall judge the waking. Disturb not the rhythm beneath, lest the sky open wide and the veil be lifted." That night, animals in the forest grew restless. Dogs barked at nothing. Birds took flight with no sound to prompt them, and by morning the lake had changed. Steam clung to its surface, thin but persistent. The water's edge had shifted outward by a foot, swallowing reeds and trail markers. The trees nearest the bank looked sick, their leaves yellowing, bark splitting in thin vertical scars. Clara stood at the shoreline, equipment in hand, eyes fixed on the water. "It's growing," she said simply. Ellie joined her, clutching the carved stone. From the center of the lake, a slow ripple moved outward, silent and deliberate. Jonas appeared behind them, pale and tense. "Something's wrong," he said. "My compass won't work." And the power lines flickered all night. Ellie didn't speak. Her mind echoed with her grandfather's warning. If they wake again... But she didn't run. Not yet. Jonas stared at his compass as if sheer will might make the needle settle, but it continued to twitch erratically, spinning whenever he neared the lake. His usual logic failed him now. No iron deposits, no equipment malfunction, just something unseen pulling the world off balance. Ellie stood beside Clara at the ranger station, studying the carved eye stone beneath a magnifying lens. The more she looked at it, the more it unsettled her. The grooves were not worn randomly. They pulsed with a strange geometry, as if following rules only ancient hands had known. Clara adjusted her scope. "It's not a symbol, it's a map," she murmured. Ellie blinked. "A map of what?" Clara pointed to the concentric rings. "These aren't just decorative, they correspond to the magnetic field shifts we're seeing. The outer ring matches the lake's current perimeter, but the inner ones, something's changing beneath us, like layers peeling back." Ellie remembered the journal. "If they wake again." That afternoon another ripple spread across the water, wide and circular, with no cause, no stone, no boat, just movement from the center, steady and silent. They followed it to the edge, where reeds had begun to turn grey. "I've never seen plant decay this fast," Clara whispered. Jonas joined them, holding a worn piece of paper. "I went through my father's old desk," he said. "Found this map. He marked this exact spot, said it was where he heard voices." Ellie looked up sharply. "Voices?" "He thought he was going crazy, but he kept coming back here. Said it was the only place the static in his head stopped." A low hum passed through the air, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Ellie's teeth ache. Birds fled from the trees in flocks. Across the lake something shifted just beneath the surface, too large for a fish, too fluid for a log. Then the sky darkened, not from clouds, but from a sudden dimming, as if something massive had passed between them and the sun. Clara's equipment beeped in alarm. "Electromagnetic spike," she said, breathless. "Massive." Jonas backed away. "This isn't natural." "No," Clara agreed. "But it's intelligent." They made camp that night in Ellie's living room, maps and notes spread across every surface. The carved stone rested in the center, drawing their eyes back to it again and again. No matter where they stood, the symbol seemed to follow. Jonas rubbed his forehead. "My father said the lake talked in dreams, said it showed things it wasn't supposed to." Ellie's voice was quiet. "Then maybe it wants us to know." At midnight, Ellie woke with a start. The air felt wrong, heavy, metallic. Her skin prickled as she stepped outside. Across the lake, faint lights shimmered just beneath the water's surface. Not reflections, but embedded glow like stars caught under glass. She called the others. They stood in silence, watching. Dozens of tiny orbs moved in perfect synchronicity, forming circles, then lines, then an eye. Clara gasped. "It's a response." "To what?" Jonas asked. "To us," Ellie said. "To the stone. To my family." And then, without warning, the eye vanished. The lake went still, and something else came from the woods. Not a deer this time, but a low groan, almost human, almost mechanical. Ellie clutched the stone tightly. The silence that followed was absolute. In that moment, they all understood. This wasn't just about bones in the mud or dreams in the dark. Something had noticed them, and whatever it was, it had opened its eye. The first tremor struck before dawn. Ellie woke to her lamp clattering to the floor and books tumbling from shelves. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't an earthquake, not really. The floor didn't shift, the walls didn't crack. It was more like the ground had groaned beneath her, a deep, vibrating breath that passed through the bones of the house. Clara was already outside when Ellie rushed out. The air was cold, sharper than it should have been. The pulse spiked, Clara said, adjusting her wristwatch. "Whatever it is, it's moving closer." Jonas arrived moments later, having felt the same unnatural lurch from his family's cabin. He looked more rattled than usual, eyes sunken with the kind of fear that didn't come from superstition, but from memory. "2 of my dogs are missing," he said. "The others won't leave the crawl space." Ellie didn't need to ask. She knew the lake had stirred again. Together they hiked to the edge of the forest. The trees looked different, not just the sickly yellowing from days before, but wrong, as if something had passed through them. The bark had cracked in thin, vertical lines. Moss peeled away in strange, curling patterns, and beneath their boots the ground was warm. They found a circle where nothing grew. 15 feet wide, perfectly round, the soil blackened and dead. Ellie knelt and touched it. "It wasn't fire," she whispered. "There's no ash, just absence." Clara nodded grimly. "Magnetics are off the chart here. Whatever did this, it came from below." A sound caught their ears, a whisper, faint and rasping, rising from the woods like wind through hollow bones. Ellie turned sharply. "Did you hear that?" Jonas had gone pale. "That's the same sound my father recorded. He said it followed him for weeks." The whisper faded, but unease remained. They returned to town, only to be met with chaos. A child had gone missing overnight. Lydia Cray's youngest, 6 years old, last seen playing near the river. Ellie's stomach dropped. Voices rose in the town square. Accusations flew. Suspicion hung thick in the air, most of it directed at Ellie. Some blamed the scientist. Others mumbled about curses, about the Warren family's history. Father Rook stood at the center, arms raised. We must not let this darkness root itself in our hearts. Fear feeds it. Curiosity invites it. But his eyes never left Ellie. Later that day, she returned to the care home. Her grandmother sat silent, hands folded, rocking gently. Ellie sat beside her, fighting the urge to scream. "I don't know what to do," she said softly. "Everything's falling apart." Miriam blinked slowly. "We thought we could keep it quiet," she murmured. "But it always comes back, it waits." Ellie took her hand. "What waits, Gran?" "The ones beneath," Miriam said. "The ones we buried." "Not in soil. In silence." Ellie's chest tightened. "Did you see them?" Miriam didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the window. Then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, "They're listening now." That night, Ellie, Jonas, and Clara returned to the lake with more equipment and more questions. Clara dropped a temperature probe into the water. It sank 6 feet, then stopped. "It's warm," she said. "Too warm. Something's generating heat below." Ellie knelt by the shore. The carved stone in her pocket felt hot. She pulled it out. It glowed faintly, like it had absorbed the lake's breath. The three of them stood in silence as another ripple moved across the water. No wind, no sound, just motion, deliberate and slow. Then came the second tremor, this one stronger, deeper. The ground shifted beneath their feet. Clara's equipment buzzed violently. From deep within the lake, a sound like a bell tolled, but it came not through the air, but through their bodies. A tone that bypassed ears and echoed inside their chests. And Ellie understood something then. This was not the beginning. It was the remembering. The sun never truly rose the next day. A thick grey haze clung to the sky, casting Eldon Hollow in a permanent twilight. Jonas sat alone in his father's study, dust coating every surface like ash after a long-forgotten fire. He hadn't stepped into this room in over a decade, not since the night of his father's final breakdown. Back then he'd thought it was just madness, the mutterings of a man who'd stared too long at shadows. But now those mutterings sounded more like warnings. He opened the old cedar chest beneath the desk and found a stack of tapes labeled only with dates. He slid one into the player. Static filled the room, then a voice, cracked, desperate, familiar. "If you find this, it means it's happening again." The lake speaks, not with words, with memory, with light. It shows you what you don't want to know. Jonas let the tape run, his throat dry. His father had known. He'd begged someone to listen, and no one had. Meanwhile, Ellie wandered the edge of town. Whispers followed her. Not voices, real whispers, hushed and heavy, from people who once greeted her by name. Now they avoided her eyes, blamed her for the missing child, for the dying trees, for the stillness of the lake. She entered the general store for supplies and felt the silence descend. The clerk, normally cheerful, handed her the bag without a word. As she left, a group of men stood by the door watching. "You stirred something best left alone," one muttered. Ellie turned, her voice sharper than she intended. "It was already stirring. I just stopped pretending not to hear it." They didn't answer. That evening, Clara called them both back to the ranger station. Her face was pale, and the carved stone sat beneath a microscope, humming faintly. I tested it against every known mineral. It's not just reacting, it's responding, like it's syncing with the lake. Ellie leaned in. "To what end?" "I think it's trying to open something." Jonas stepped back. "We need to destroy it." "You can't," Clara said. "It's not just stone. It's organic, part of a larger system." Silence followed. Then Jonas, quiet. "My father thought this place was a door, that the lake wasn't just water, it was a mirror, a veil." Ellie nodded slowly. "And something's on the other side." That night they returned to the church. Rook's sermon was louder, harsher. The congregation swayed with his words, nodding like reeds in the wind. "She walks among us with old blood," Rook shouted. The sins of her house opened the path once before and now again. He didn't name Ellie, but he didn't need to. After the sermon, she confronted him in the aisle. "You want them to fear me," she said. "Why?" Rook's expression never changed. "Because fear keeps doors closed." Jonas stepped between them. Or maybe you just don't want them asking why your name's in the old church records next to every missing person in 1922. The preacher's jaw tensed. You don't understand the cost of ignorance. No, Ellie said. You just fear losing control. They left in silence. Behind them, the congregation watched, divided. Later that night, a stone shattered the schoolhouse window. Then another. Ellie rushed outside, heart racing, only to see figures in the shadows scatter. One voice stayed behind, a child's voice trembling. They said you brought the storm. Ellie knelt. I didn't bring it, but I won't let it take anyone else. The boy stared at her, then vanished into the dark. She stood alone, glass crunching beneath her boots as clouds rolled in thick and low. A storm was coming, and this time no one would be able to pretend it wasn't real. The lake called her back, not with words or dreams, but with silence. A silence so heavy Ellie couldn't bear it. It pressed into her ears, into her lungs, until the only way to breathe again was to return. Clara warned her. Jonas tried to stop her, but Ellie knew something waited beneath the surface, and whatever it was, it had noticed her from the beginning. She tied a rope around her waist, handed the other end to Clara, and stepped into the water. The chill stole her breath. Even in late October, the lake should have been colder, but this warmth wasn't natural. It pulsed like breath, like heartbeat. She dove. Below, everything shifted. The further she descended, the darker the world became. Not from lack of light, but from something in the water itself. A presence, a density. The carved stone tucked into her belt glowed faintly, lighting her way in greenish arcs. 10 feet down, the rope tugged against her. Clara's signal. Ellie ignored it. 15 feet. The bottom came into view, or what should have been the bottom. Instead, there was a hollow, a depression in the lake bed, shaped not by nature but by design. In its center, a massive stone slab identical to the one in her pocket, only this one pulsed. Then she saw it. Movement. Not a creature, not quite. Not tentacled or finned. Just presence. Like a shape moving behind a curtain of thick glass, enormous and slow, circling the slab. She reached for it. The water throbbed. Suddenly, pressure clamped around her chest. Her limbs froze. The lake wasn't pulling her under. It was pushing something out. A voice filled her skull. You opened the eye. Her scream came out as bubbles. The rope tightened violently. Above, Clara and Jonas heaved. The surface boiled as if the lake resisted their efforts. Finally, Ellie burst upward, gasping, choking, shivering. They dragged her to shore, where she lay coughing, the carved stone now glowing like fire in her hand. What did you see? Clara asked. Ellie shook her head, still reeling. It's not just a creature. It's not alive in the way we understand. It's watching. Not just me, everything. Jonas knelt beside her. You said it spoke. Not in words, she whispered. In pressure. In weight. It's aware. It sees through the lake. Clara frowned. Like a sensor? Like a warden, Ellie said. And I think it's been keeping something in. Silence followed. Behind them, the lake was still again. But its calm now felt like the hush before a scream. That night, Ellie didn't dream. She remembered. The sensation of the water wasn't cold or wet. It had felt like being inside a mind. She hadn't just seen a shape. She'd been seen, measured, judged, and spared. But why? At dawn, she stood on her porch, wrapped in blankets. The carved stone pulsed faintly in her palm. Her skin still smelled of lake water. Jonas joined her. We need to tell them. They won't listen. Then we show them, he said. Ellie nodded. She didn't know how, but she knew they were out of time. The lake was changing. The trees had begun to lean toward it. Bark stripped on one side as if something scraped by in the night. Birds avoided it entirely now. And beneath the surface, lights flickered like stars behind clouded glass. Clara reviewed the data again and again. It's not rising, she said. It's swelling. The entire basin. It's going to erupt, not with lava, with memory. Jonas stared at the horizon. What does that mean? Ellie spoke slowly. It means we're not dealing with a monster. We're standing on the mouth of something ancient. And it's trying to speak. The storm broke just after midnight, not with thunder but with silence. The wind vanished. The trees stopped swaying. Even the insects ceased their endless buzz. Eldon Hollow stood suspended, like breath held too long. Ellie stood at the lake's edge, the carved stone pulsing in her hand like a second heartbeat. Behind her, Jonas and Clara set up a final array of instruments. None of them spoke. Words felt too fragile now. The water shimmered, glass smooth under a sky that churned with dark, unnatural clouds. Bolts of lightning arced without thunder, crawling sideways like veins across the heavens. And then, at the center of the lake, something rose. Not a creature, not a ship. A column of water lifted itself upward, defying gravity. Within it, lights turned, not reflections, but eyes. Dozens, hundreds, all open, all watching. Ellie took a step forward. From the trees behind them, shouting. They turned. Father Rook emerged, surrounded by townspeople holding torches and rifles. His voice rang out like a verdict. "You were warned. You brought this down upon us." He held up a crude iron cross. "She's the key, the girl from the line. She must be given back." Jonas moved to shield Ellie. "You're insane." "No," Rook said. "I'm faithful." And then he lunged. The townsfolk surged forward. Chaos ignited. Clara's instruments smashed. Jonas shoved to the ground. Hands tore at Ellie's coat, tried to wrench the stone from her grip. But Ellie didn't let go. The moment Rook touched her, the lake screamed. Not a sound, but a vibration, sharp, deep, infinite. Everyone froze, clutching ears that bled without sound. The water crashed downward. The storm exploded. Lightning struck the shoreline, blinding and white. The carved stone burst into flame in Ellie's hand, but she didn't feel pain, only heat, vast and pure, like standing at the edge of creation. The column of water collapsed, revealing what had been hidden. A structure, rising from the lakebed, carved from obsidian and time, etched with the eye. Not a god, not a beast, but a witness. Ellie fell to her knees. The watchers had not come. They had always been there, and now the gate was open. Jonas crawled to her side. "Ellie!" She looked up. "I saw it. I saw everything." Rook stood frozen, his eyes wide and empty. Then he dropped to his knees and wept. "It's judgment," he whispered. "They've come to judge." But Ellie shook her head. "No, they've come to remember." Clara stumbled forward. "The readings. My God, they're transmitting." Ellie stood slowly. The stone was gone, consumed. But the vision remained. Flashes filled her mind. The town as it was in 1901. The first awakening. The failed warnings. Her grandfather's face, young and terrified. Miriam on the shore crying into the wind. And beyond that, images of places she had never seen, of cities not yet built, skies not yet opened. All of it carried by the lake. A memory, a warning, a choice. The watchers did not want sacrifice. They wanted acknowledgement, truth. "I know what to do," Ellie whispered. She turned to face the townspeople. "You've been afraid because no one ever told you the truth, because they buried it, generation after generation." She pointed to the lake. "But they've always been here, watching, waiting. And now they're asking us to see." For a moment, no one moved. Then the storm stopped. The clouds cleared, and the eyes, those infinite eyes, blinked once, then vanished beneath the water. The lake stilled. The light faded. Rook collapsed. And Ellie stood alone at the edge, no longer afraid. The veil had lifted, and the world would never look the same again. Ellie stood at the lake's edge, still as stone. The storm had passed, but the air remained charged, each breath laced with something old and metallic. Around her the world felt too quiet, as if everything waited for what came next. The surface of the lake rippled once, then again, slower this time, like a sigh. Light returned, but not from the sun. It came from beneath, rising upward in soft waves, illuminating the mist. Ellie blinked, and time split. She stood in two places at once, here and somewhere else. Her body remained on the shore, but her mind plunged deep into the lake, not just through water, but through memory. Images flooded her. A town, but not Eldon Hollow. A village with different names, different faces. Children laughed by a fire. Then darkness, screams. A sky filled with eyes, just like her dream. She saw her ancestors, faces strained with fear and wonder. The watchers stood before them, not creatures, not spirits, but forms of light and pattern, like thoughts given shape. They did not speak, but Ellie understood them. "We came to preserve." She saw the watchers placing the stones, embedding memory into the earth like seeds, each symbol a lock, each lake a vessel. "We do not punish. We hold what you refuse to carry." Then a vision of her own time, herself as a child standing at the lake's edge, the storm, the dream, the same eyes reflected in the water. And then, the future. Eldon Hollow changed, no longer afraid. Children walking freely by the lake, a museum in the church, writings preserved. The watchers, still there, always, but silent, watching without judgment. This is the choice. She understood now. The watchers were not bringers of death, they were recorders, witnesses, and the lake was not a mouth, it was a mirror. Her consciousness returned like a wave receding. She gasped, clutching her chest, tears on her cheeks. Jonas and Clara were beside her. "You were gone," Jonas whispered. "Your eyes, they glowed." "I saw them," she said hoarsely. "I saw everything." Clara gripped her shoulder. "What do they want?" "Truth," Ellie said. "They want us to remember, not just the past." But the cost of hiding it. Behind them the town gathered at the tree line. No one spoke, but their faces showed the same wonder, the same fear. They'd seen the light, the vision. Not all of it, but enough. Ellie turned toward them. "They're not here to destroy us. They've never been. We did that to ourselves. Every time we buried the truth." She looked to Father Rook, who stood among them, face hollow. "I tried to protect us," he said, voice breaking. "You protected a lie," she replied, "and it almost cost us everything." He dropped to his knees, hands trembling. The townsfolk remained still. The wind shifted, cool and gentle. The lake reflected only sky now, calm and glassy. Ellie turned back. The stone slab had receded beneath the surface, the light fading. Jonas stepped closer. "Do you think they're gone?" "No," she said. "They're resting." Clara exhaled slowly, staring out across the water. "What do we do now?" Ellie looked at them, at the town, at the trees, at the sky. "We start over. This time, with open eyes." That night, no dreams came, only peace. For the first time since childhood, Ellie slept without seeing eyes in the sky, but in the deep the watchers remained, silent, waiting, witnessing. Morning came without thunder. The clouds had scattered, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight touched the lake. A golden haze floated above the water, softening the outlines of trees and casting long, rippling reflections across the surface. The watchers were gone or resting, but their presence lingered like a breath held in the hollow of the earth. Ellie stood before the town, gathered near the schoolhouse. No one had asked her to speak, but no one stopped her either. Her voice was quiet, steady. "We've lived with this lake for generations, feared it, avoided it, lied about it, but it never left. And it never stopped seeing us." She looked to the crowd. Some familiar faces nodded, others looked away. A few wept. "It wasn't here to punish," she said. "It was here to carry what we refused to face, to hold the truths we were too afraid to remember." Clara stood beside her, holding the journals, the church records, and the stone fragments. They had decided together. No more hiding. Everything would be preserved, written, recorded, shared. Jonas took a breath and stepped forward. "My father wasn't mad. He was trying to tell us what we refused to hear, and he wasn't alone." From the back of the crowd, someone asked, "What about the ones who disappeared? The missing children, the bones?" Ellie didn't flinch. "They're not forgotten. The lake remembered them. It always did." She stepped aside. The townsfolk remained quiet, but something shifted. A weight lifted, not fully, but enough. That afternoon, Ellie, Clara, and Jonas returned to the ranger station and began copying everything they had found. Pages were transcribed, maps redrawn, memories catalogued. Clara took measurements of the magnetic field, now settled and calm. She murmured almost to herself, "It's breathing slower now." In the care home, Miriam Warren stirred for the last time. Ellie was there, holding her hand. Her grandmother opened her eyes, clear, focused, for the first time in weeks. "I heard them again," Miriam whispered, "but they were quiet, like wind through pine." Ellie brushed back her hair. "They're resting." Miriam smiled faintly. "Then I can too." She passed without fear. At dusk the town gathered at the lake. Not for a sermon, not for a ritual, but to watch. For once they didn't look away. Children threw stones into the water. Elders shared old stories, now laced with honesty instead of fear. Ellie watched them all from the hill, hand wrapped around the last fragment of the carved stone. Clara approached. "We could publish this," she said. "Science journals, historical societies, people need to know." Ellie nodded. "But not as legend. Not as myth, as memory. Jonas joined them. Think they'll come back? They never left, Ellie replied. But they trust us now. The lake remained still, its surface reflecting a sky no longer filled with eyes, but with stars. That night, Ellie walked the town's edge. No longer hunted by dreams, she greeted them when they came. Memories offered freely now, not forced upon her. She welcomed them. In one, her grandfather knelt by the lake, burying a stone with tears in his eyes. In another, her younger self ran through the woods laughing, watched by something unseen, not a predator but a guardian. She smiled in her sleep. The watchers had been misunderstood. Not gods, not monsters, archivists. And the moment the town chose remembrance over fear, the cycle broke. Eldon Hollow breathed easier now. And beneath the surface, the lake no longer reflected terror. It reflected truth. Days passed. The sky stayed clear, the storms no longer clawing at the town's edges. Eldon Hollow breathed easier, as though a fever had broken. The lake remained still, not silent but peaceful. No more lights, no more pulses beneath the surface. Only the wind moving gently across the water like fingers turning a final page. Ellie stood in front of the schoolhouse, chalk in hand. The children were gathered inside, wide-eyed and restless, sensing the change even if they couldn't name it. She had rewritten the week's lessons to include local history, real history, what the lake had shown, what the town had hidden. Some parents had hesitated, but most came around. Truth, once released, didn't scare as much as the unknown had. Outside, Jonas leaned against the doorway watching. Never thought I'd see this place teach the truth. Ellie smiled. They're ready now. They want to know. He nodded. So do I. Clara, meanwhile, continued her research. She stayed in Eldon Hollow longer than planned, drawn to the magnetic quiet that had settled over the region. Her equipment recorded only silence now, but that silence fascinated her more than the noise ever had. This place, she told Ellie one evening, is stable, balanced. Whatever the watchers were holding, they've sealed it again. For now, they sat by the lake watching fireflies flicker above the surface. Ellie still carried the last fragment of the stone, now cracked but warm, as if alive. She spoke softly. Do you think they trusted us, or did they just get tired? Clara considered. I think they understood us. And that was enough. Back in town, the church doors remained open, but the sermons had changed. Father Rook no longer shouted from the altar. He sat in the pews with the others, sometimes praying, sometimes just listening. He looked older now, not from guilt, but from release. Ellie visited him once. They didn't speak, but when she left, he placed his hand on her shoulder gently. Not as a warning. Not as absolution, just acknowledgement. In the care home, Miriam Warren was buried beside her husband, beneath a willow that had begun to bloom again. The ceremony was quiet. Ellie placed the cracked stone at the base of the tree, where the roots would find it. She carried it longer than any of us, Ellie said. Jonas squeezed her hand. And now it rests with her. As autumn deepened, the trees turned gold and red, but none near the lake withered anymore. The blackened circles had faded, replaced by new growth, wildflowers in strange colors, blooming without pattern, as though the earth was remembering itself. Children ran freely near the water again. Not one of them disappeared. Ellie spent her evenings writing. Letters, journals, memories. Some she kept. Others she sent to universities, libraries, researchers across the country. Clara helped transcribe the findings into something that straddled science and story. It's all part of the same thread, Clara said. Myth and magnetism, memory and mass. What matters is that it's recorded. Jonas began compiling his father's tapes and journals into a book. He titled it simply, Reflections from the Hollow. Together they told the truth, and the town listened. One morning, Ellie found herself by the lake again. The water glimmered, undisturbed. She crouched, let her fingers trail across the surface. No images appeared, no voices rose, only the reflection of her own eyes. Tired, yes, but steady. She whispered, Thank you. A single ripple broke the surface. Then it stilled again. Not silence, not absence, just rest. Eldon Hollow had changed, not in ways that made headlines, but in the quiet strength of a place that had faced its past and chosen not to bury it again. The watchers still slept beneath the water, but now they slept in peace. Ellie walked the ridge above Eldon Hollow with a letter in her hand and a notebook tucked beneath her arm. The leaves crackled underfoot. copper and crimson scattered like old memories. She paused by the overlook, where the lake stretched wide and still, its surface unbroken. She sat on a bench Jonas had built that summer, carved with quiet care into the wood. What we choose to remember shapes what we become. From here, the whole town lay visible, the schoolhouse, the church, the cemetery, the narrow streets now filled with laughter and bicycles and warmth. It no longer felt like a place trapped in shadow. It felt lived in, alive. Ellie opened the notebook. Inside were names, not of the lost but of the remembered. Each page held a memory, some hers, some passed down, some recovered from journals, whispers, or dreams. They were no longer secrets, they were roots. She turned to the letter, addressed to a university researcher who had written to her in awe, asking permission to visit the lake, to study its energetic anomalies. She smiled gently, set pen to paper and wrote, "You're welcome to come. But what you'll find here won't fit inside your instruments. Bring questions, but also bring quiet. Let the lake speak first." She sealed the letter and placed it in her satchel. Down the hill she passed the old care home, now transformed into a community archive. Clara had organized it with local volunteers, every shelf filled with artifacts, sketches, documents, and oral histories recorded on reel-to-reel. Children visited weekly, guided by their teachers, pointing at the maps with wide, curious eyes. One wall bore a mural, the lake in moonlight painted with 1,000 tiny eyes not to frighten, but to honor. Inside, Ellie found Jonas sorting a box of photographs. "Clara's coming back next month," he said. "Wants to compare lake readings again. Said it's steadier than any she's measured in the last decade." Ellie smiled. "Makes sense. Balance has its own kind of gravity." He held up a photo of Ellie as a child, standing by the lake with Miriam. Both faces were turned toward the water, both smiling. "I think we're ready to write the ending," he said. Ellie nodded. "Or the beginning." That evening, Ellie stood before her fireplace, the last page of her notebook open. She hesitated, then wrote one final sentence. "We looked into the water, and for the first time it looked back without sorrow." She closed the book. Later, she returned to the lake alone, not for answers, just to sit. The sky above was clear, stars sharp against the dark. The water shimmered softly, touched by moonlight. She sat on the sand, wrapped in her coat, legs crossed, listening. No voices came, no visions stirred, only a gentle breeze, and yet she felt them still, not watching, not waiting, just present, like the hush between notes in a song. A family passed behind her, parents and 2 children, the youngest skipping stones. One stone danced across the lake. The girl laughed. "Look, it's blinking." Ellie turned, smiled, and said nothing. The child pointed. "There in the ripples." Ellie followed her gaze. The lake reflected the stars, dozens, hundreds, and in the shifting light, just for a moment, they did look like eyes. Not threatening, just awake. Ellie rose, brushing sand from her coat. As she walked back through the trees, fireflies danced in her path, and somewhere far above, the wind whispered through pine needles with the softness of a lullaby. Whatever lay beneath the lake, it no longer waited. And Ellie, no longer haunted, walked home in peace. Autumn deepened. The last leaves fell like slow confessions, drifting down to rest on the lake's surface. Eldon Hollow settled into a rhythm, quiet, steady, whole. The tension that once gripped its bones had eased, leaving behind a stillness that felt earned. Ellie stood at the edge of the dock, watching her breath rise in clouds. She had returned here every week since the storm, never searching, only witnessing. In her hands, a sealed envelope. Inside, a transcript of the full archive, journals, records, the stone's mapping patterns, Clara's measurements and her own accounts. She had made copies for universities, for historians, and one for the town itself. But this envelope would go somewhere else. She stepped forward and knelt, slipping it into a waterproof capsule. With care, she secured it beneath the dock, tucked into a hollow beam. Not for today, not for her, for the future. As she stood, a gust of wind stirred the water. Light danced across the lake, and the stars above rippled with it. Perfect reflections, like eyes half open in understanding. She smiled. Jonas arrived minutes later, carrying a thermos and 2 tin cups. He poured the coffee and handed her one. "You still come here," he said. "So do you," she replied. They sat together, watching the light shift. No voices, no visions. just the soft rustle of water and the occasional call of an owl deep in the trees. "You ever wonder if they're still watching?" he asked. Ellie looked out across the surface. "I don't think they ever stopped." "But they're not afraid anymore," Jonas said. She nodded. "Neither are we." Behind them, laughter rose from the trail as a group of children approached. They were led by a young teacher, no older than Ellie had been when she returned to Eldon Hollow. The children asked questions about the lake, the symbols, the watchers, and they were given answers. The teacher smiled and waved at Ellie. "They want to know about the storm." Ellie walked toward them, crouched beside the nearest child, and said gently, "It wasn't just a storm. It was a remembering." The children listened, wide-eyed. She told them the story, not as a warning, but as a legacy, of what was hidden, what was found, and what it meant to see clearly. When she finished, the children scattered toward the lake, skipping stones, laughing. Jonas joined her again, hands in his pockets. "You think it'll hold? That the truth will stay?" Ellie looked out over the water. "Only if we keep telling it." The sun dipped lower, casting long gold lines across the hills. The lake shimmered, still and endless. A final gust of wind passed over, rippling the surface. For just a second, the stars above and the reflection below merged perfectly. Eyes above, eyes below, watching, not with judgment, with memory. Ellie whispered, "And this time, we won't forget." She turned to Jonas, her voice soft but sure. "Let's go home." As they walked back up the trail, the wind carried the sound of children's laughter, the rustling of leaves, and something deeper, a hum, barely audible, like the pulse of the world itself, content at last. And though the watchers did not rise again, though the sky remained clear and the lake undisturbed, the memory lived on, in pages, in voices, in eyes that chose to look and truly see. If you've come this far, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, tales where memory, mystery, and meaning converge. And if you want to keep exploring, click the next video on your screen. The lake may be still, but there are always more reflections waiting.